Welcome to Inside the Blueprint, where we explore how vision turns into impact. I am Carl Manlan, and today we are talking about one of the most important forces shaping the continent's future, skills, and the leaders creating access to them.
And I'm Claire, your co-host and Carl's daughter. I'm still in school, and I know what it feels like to be told skills are everything, but not always understand what that actually means. That's why I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Amrote Abdella is part of a strategic pursuit team at AWS Professional Services, where she works with enterprise clients across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa to drive digital transformation. Before all this, she led regional effort to expand digital access, skills training, and innovation across Africa. From Ethiopia to Kenya to the global tech space, Amrote brings insight, intention, and clear commitment to unlocking opportunities for youth. Amrote, welcome to Inside the Blueprint.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. A pleasure to be here.
Before we start, if this podcast resonates with you, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Every listen keeps us having these conversations across generations about things that really matter.
We are building something meaningful here, and we are glad you are part of it.
All right, let's get into it.
So we like to navigate across generations, and part of this conversation is really to emphasize the power that we have in those conversations for all of us to learn from each other. The first thing is really about, if you can take us to the time when you were 13, and what were you thinking about them, and did the idea of skills, in terms of future careers, what did that mean to you, if anything, at that time?
That's a really great question, Carl. At 13, if I were to be very honest, I don't know if I thought about career as much as it was, what are the things that really drew me and sort of engaged me. And so when you think about it, sort of at 13, you're sort of, just entering your teen years. You're thinking of, your friends mostly. How do you socially adjust? How do you gain experience? You start dabbling into things that start piquing your interest, right? So whether it's at home, you're, going into cooking, or whether you're getting into a little bit more in depth in your sports activities. So that's what 13 was. But really, truly, in terms of what shaped me, I would say it was the exposure to the different things at that time. So it was less of one thing, but the exposure to the many that then sort of continued to refine.
And when you were like around that age, even if you, like, as you said, it was more about like, your friends and things around you. But did you have any idea of what you wanted to be when you grew up, or did it come like later?
Claire, I wish I had. So it was, look, I was born, raised in Addis. So the exposure that you have in terms of career are, limited to the things that were traditional and what were there, right? So you became a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer. If you were a bit adventurous, you went into sort of, the aviation. So whether you were a stewardess or a captain, like those were the things that were there. And then from what drew me quite a lot and what I enjoyed, and again, goes back to exposure, was TV shows, right? So lawyers, and sort of the ability to be sharp on your feet, think fast, speak, argue, and sort of, and develop your thesis as a young person, something that really drew me. And I recall we had debate classes, and the debate classes, I think, reinforced that a little bit more. And what that helped me initially sort of think was, I think I want to be a lawyer, right? So when I went to college, I was on the pre-law track, thinking that's really the way I want to do it. Again, shaped by a few great 80s and 90s shows that depicted what that life could look like. But what you realize is, what you start going and understanding a bit more, is the ability to be analytical in your thinking, right? That's really what it is. So it's, how do you present your thoughts? How do you analyze information? How do you communicate information as well? Was really the underlying sort of, I think, skills at that time that I probably honed on. So I really enjoyed debating my teachers. I don't know if they enjoyed it as much as I did, but it would be, I remember, it was, and I was at the French school at Lycée Français Gabriel Marin. And there was an English teacher, I will never forget, Monsieur Mondeng from Cameroon, and we would have sort of a 40-minute debate while the entire class just watched us go back and forth. And it could be on different issues. It could be about race, it could be about development, it could be about poverty, it could be about, and those classes were in English, right? And so, yeah, that was my one break away from the French into English. And we just really went at it. And that was amazing, generally. I think, I hope he's well wherever he is, because he really helped shape my own confidence and how I communicated, and then started developing that further.
Which means that he probably saw a gap and an opportunity that maybe you didn't see.
Sure.
But teachers have that amazing ability, when they're really, really good teacher, to help a child, because in a way you were monopolizing the class for 40 minutes. But everybody else were getting an insight into what it takes to have the confidence, to be able to articulate your ideas, and to share perspective. I mean, I didn't have that experience of 40 minutes monopolizing, but no, I think that's it's quite a treat from a teacher.
Yeah, it was
to
generally.
see. And the reason why I raise this is because when we speak about skills, we speak about the African continent, it's often seen from the perspective of a gap to be filled. But as a 13-year-old, as you described it, you didn't see any gap, or did you?
No, it wasn't a gap, to be honest with you. It was, so I think there are two things that were there at that time. One is the confidence to be able to communicate and to push back on ideas, right? And I think that today is even a skill that, I push on my kids, which is, if you feel strongly about a topic, sort of go after it, stand for it, but always be open to shape your idea back, right? And so assume that, the other person may also have a point, and so take away what's critical. So confidence, I think, as a teenager, sort of as a 13-year-old, I think is absolutely key, right? But be open to learning, right? Because that's a very thin line between being confident and being stubborn. So you need to be able to know that you can validate, have data points to support your argument, but be open enough that if someone pushes back, that you're able to take that in and be able to sort of learn from it as well. And then the second one was just the being encouraged by the banter, right? And I think that's what he did for me. He allowed me to take space and to create a space where I could really sort of go back and forth. And that is one example where I think as a 13-year-old, you get the exposure to say, I can actually go back and forth. And I do believe, you reinforce your ideas, your own confidence to be able to do it. And again, go back to synthesizing how you communicate your arguments and your thoughts. I think that becomes even more critical as you move forward. Do you do that, Claire?
Do
debate, argue?
Well, last year I remember we did a unit on debating. Yeah, I found it quite fun, and I think we did it this year, but we didn't do it in English. We did it in social studies. But also I like doing it because, you talk about some topic. Like this year we were talking about deforestation, and like we were saying like it's good, and then and even if you're not like presenting, it's interesting to like watch how other people like present, and how like, because it was like a group of, I think, like 4 people. So, and then you see like how everyone talks differently and how like they. So yeah, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
And then when I say you must do something and then you say no, that's the same as debating, right? Yeah.
Do you debate him quite a lot?
She does. She does. But to your point, for parents, it's creating the space.
Yeah.
That safe space at home for that debate to happen, so that they learn, to push on the idea and go in the direction. And I always tell them, whatever you decide, you have to make sure that you do it in the best possible way. I will not sort of stop you, but I want you to make sure that you go until you do it to the best possible way. And that's what is coming out of your experience of your teacher. So you chose, or I don't know if you chose or your parents decided, that Addis was great, but you had to expand your wings to other parts of the world. So where did you go when you left Addis? And were you clear as to what kind of skills you're going to build when you left? You mentioned being inspired by lawyers, starting that track, and probably you didn't finish because I don't think I know you as a lawyer.
No, I am not a lawyer today, and probably for very good reasons. I don't know if I would be good at it, to be honest with you. But I think what led after that was just this passion again into, what you see shapes you, and what you experience definitely creates the foundation of who you become. And I remember from exposure, my parents would be at home having sort of extremely lively debates with all their friends, right, around politics, around the economy and what was happening. And that was sort of a staple in the house, right? So it would always be sort of with guests, with friends, with family members, etc., coming, and there'd always be these discussions. And you're exposed to the debates and you're exposed to the discussions. And I think eventually what I ended up going into ended up being economics and political science, the two topics where I was like, that's how families are destroyed. Like when they debate is when everything goes south. But that ended up being the track that I ended up in. And that, again, sort of gives you the exposure to start thinking about how do you continue to learn? How do you continue to get exposure to be able to do it?
Why do you think digital and like tech skills can help people around my age or older, younger?
I think there are two ways I would say sort of to think about, especially for young people for your age, 12, 13, 14. This generation, your generation, Claire, has adopted technology in a way that myself or your father have never done, right? Like know how to operate any device at any point better than any of us, right? So in terms of the skill of how to communicate and utilize it, I think you already have it. The question is, how do you utilize that to make it productive for you, right? Now, there's a great number of conversations around, AI and AI models that are out there. The question is, how do you use it to make it more productive? And how do you utilize it to supplement what you do, right? And so by the time you get to college, we used to have to write papers. I doubt that anyone will have to start looking at writing papers sort of top to bottom, sort of on their own, sitting somewhere on a laptop, sort of in a lab. That will change very quickly, right? So it will be a question of how do you use technology in a way that supplements your argument, but for you to be able to utilize it to be additive to your own thinking, to your own skills, and not necessarily outsource it. So the way you use it today, whether you're a consumer of it and utilize it, or whether you're behind it, which is sort of you're contributing to the development, and therefore you become an engineer, you start developing sort of your own tech skills. Those are the tracks in terms of how do you sort of utilize it. And you can do both as well, by the way. It doesn't have to be an either or. But that, I think, is why you need to continue to be competitive in it. So it will continue to be part of your life. It is already part of your life. It will take up, I would say, sort of more space and utilization of how you use it more and more as you go, especially sort of, as you continue your studies.
Yeah.
By the time you finish high school, it will take a completely different form. By the time you finish college, it will be completely. So how you utilize it, I think, will change. But what's key is you have to make sure that you know that it will be there, but it will never replace the critical skills that you'll have to grow. And so to that end, I would say sort of, your own ability to be a critical thinker is important. For you to be a storyteller continues to be important, because those are the things that, AI tools cannot change for you, right? And so I think that ability to work with people, through people, while utilizing, of course, what's around you, I think will continue to be key. Yeah.
You touched on, we were talking about gap. You touched on skills and productivity. And maybe the gap is a productivity. When you think about the African continent, there are abundant of young people that have skills. And to your point, how do you use the skills to increase productivity? Is that the way you see it? With your experience living in Nairobi, one of the most dynamic places on the continent, and leading that work around skills development?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, I don't know if we have a challenge with skills. I think we have to sort of look at it in different pieces. The first part is what are students and young Africans learning and getting exposure to today, right? And that is sort of your former curriculum. And is that up to date so that what they use and what they're exposed to, what they're taught, can actually help them get and be competitive in the market as they go out? That's number one. So that's really more on the infrastructure and the systems that we have. And is that geared and tooled enough to be able to provide the right skills and insight and learning methodology for students? That's one. Once they come out, then the question is, how do they utilize that? Now, I mean, you can look at some of the great schools that we've had, from Makerere to, Jomo Kenyatta University. There's some really good schools that we have on the continent that have produced a number of great sort of engineers that have gone out to, work in large techs, right? Whether they're on the continent or abroad. We have people with the right skills to be able to compete. The question is, are we doing it at a mass scale to be able to be the next India, right? And I think that's where sort of we come short, which is, one, it's on the supply side, but on the demand side, you realize that for the number of students that we have coming out, how do we produce more of them with the right skills to be able to compete?
And how do you help people in Africa use technology for, like, I don't know, productivity, or how to, yeah.
Yeah, so I think on the productivity side, I'd say, I think let's first define the productivity, which is do people know how to use technology? And absolutely, I think that's every SME that you have in Africa has a platform of a marketplace through Facebook. It works, right? And so you no longer have to go and list your company. You're able to create a page and sort of drive traffic and create demand and push out social media so that you're able to really sort of drive brand recognition and do a proper sale. So in terms of productivity, is it functional and is it supporting the right ecosystem? Yes. But is it allowing us to become competitive again? Because you see, what you have to think about is where we are in the world. It's no longer, are we doing enough to catch up? I think we're past that point. What we have to think about is, are we producing enough skills and talent to be able to help us compete with other emerging markets in a way that allows us to gain a proper share of, I think, what is the dividend of technology. And that's where we have to focus.
The dividend of technology, it made me think of the demographic dividend and that conversation around the ability of Africa to capture the growth that comes from that change in population. But let's come back to this generation, Claire's generation, and how do we, because you and I are now part of the diaspora, and how do we ensure that the diaspora and the Africans on the continent are really thinking about being of service to Claire's generation?
In what way? Tell me more.
So we spoke about the skills.
Yeah.
There's capital requirement, and capital is both human capital. So how do we be the examples that they need to see? But there's financial capital that needs to be made available. There's also that ability to tell the story of a transformation that is happening and is working, so that their generation does not only read and see what is not working, because clearly 1.3 billion people are not all failing.
No, I agree. But look, first, Carl, they need to see you.
Like me?
They need to see you, right? You can't become what you can't see.
100%.
So you as a diaspora, wherever you are, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in North America, South America, wherever you may be in Asia, as an African, if you consider yourself to be an active diaspora who wants to contribute, you have to show up. You have to step up and you have to step in to be able to say, hey, Claire, you and your generation, this is my journey and this is what I have done. And this is where I believe I can also lend. Now, that can take any form. That can be in terms of, your time investment, your financial investment. It could be the opportunities that you create. If you have a firm, are you taking more interns? Are you giving more exposure? Are you mentoring? So it could really take on different skills. And if you have a skill where you can actually really do transfer knowledge, are you going back to teach? Are you lending yourself for workshops? Are you integrating yourself into local universities so that they can also tap into the larger diaspora communities that we have to be able to utilize it? And that's where I think the diaspora can step in. Otherwise, frankly, it's a lot of good English from different people that will be communicated.
I agree with you. A lot of English. Okay, we'll do that work. I mean, we're already doing some of it, but probably bring more into the fold of showing up, shining, and telling those stories and contributing to local universities. I like that point around local universities because it's true. Makerere, Jomo Kenyatta, University of Cape Town, where I went to, have produced talent that either on the continent or anywhere else in the world. So, Claire, you may have an opportunity to go and study somewhere in Africa as well. Let's see. Any other questions?
If someone were to be interested in gaming, art, or building things online, would you say they're learning a skill, or how do they know that they're learning a skill?
So I think maybe it's my very primitive sort of definition of skills. I think a skill is anything that you spend enough time on that you master.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a skill. So if you are, let's say, whether you're a gamer, you spend quite a bit of time playing games, then you get into creation. You say, hey, listen, I actually really want to know because I enjoy doing it and therefore I will invest a bit more time. You start developing the skills, right? Or you take it the other way around where you've always known that you want to develop games and so you become a developer and sort of take on that track. But then similarly, I think you can go into any other area where you believe that you can create and invest enough time, where you master a certain area, a certain skill, and it becomes a skill because it will start differentiating you from others, right? And so if someone says, oh, I've had exposure to, let's say, cooking, right? What makes that a skill is how much time you do and have exposure in doing repetitive tasks, right? That's where sort of, an exposure becomes a skill and a skill becomes a mastery, is in your ability to spend time bound, and also depth that you develop in a certain area.
What has been your experience working across different sectors, so government, private sector, civil society, on that transformation and tech journey? And the question is really related about the ability to absorb and leverage from a productivity perspective. And I think I'll use the terms of gaps. Are the gaps that you've seen and how maybe part of your work or partnership has enabled those gaps to be closed?
I think so. I think the one thing that stands out is you need to be the owner of your own narrative. And that can stand for you as, a teenager, Claire, or the same could stand for a nation, right? If we are able to own our narrative and sort of drive it with purpose and conviction, with the right strategy in place and with the right sort of discipline, I think we should be able to do it. And so I think to your question earlier, Claire, where you asked, how do you know you have the skill, is that you have spent the time, the discipline, and the focus in being able to master a certain task. That's where your skill comes. And so I think the same way when you look at what's pending or where is the gap today, I would say it's how much discipline do we have in driving through digital and transformation within a country. And similarly, the way we are sort of driving it, with purpose on the corporate side, right? And so how do you have that vision? Then how do you implement it to be transformative enough that it actually is either adopted or uplifting enough people into the next opportunity?
When you think about this, is there an example, and I'm not interested in comparing country A to country B, but then an example where you felt that, okay, we have all the right ingredients, and I can see this is taking off for the company, for the country, because to your earlier point, seeing the example of what works gives a sort of blueprint of how this may become. So any example, and it doesn't have to be in the tech space, but painting that picture on the skills that are developed, the consistency in working on those skills. I mean, you're an example of that. But anything that we can share that can help paint that picture. And it could be a person, a country, an island.
Yeah. I'd say sort of, look, I think we have pockets of excellence in different areas, right? Also, I know, if you look at, and I always appreciate and admire the work that, for instance, countries like Rwanda, where you have really a great number of sort of areas where the country has truly transformed and delivered sort of on a number of areas, right? And so whether you're looking at, delivery of government services or how quickly you're able to sort of, set up businesses, those are some areas where transformation, discipline, focus has yielded some of those results. And then I think there are many other countries that have followed in terms of what they're able to achieve. The one area I'll tell you though is and I'll never, I can never walk away with it without thinking of what's possible. One is the country that we're sitting in right now, right? You look at the history of the UAE and what has been achieved in the last 53 years. When you look at, the transformation, the investment, the intentional sort of design delivery, when you talk about the next 50 years, you don't have any doubt around how spectacular it will be, right? Because you've seen what has been delivered. And I think similarly, I was in China back in 2012. And we're
The year she was born.
The year you were born. So I was in China, in Tianjin, and that's the fourth largest port in the world, right? And in the room, as they were displaying what they have done, they started the journey of, where it started roughly about 50, 60 years ago. And they started going through sort of in an oval room, what they achieved in the first sort of every 10 years, right? They're like, this is where we started, 10 years on, etc. And then you arrived in the middle of the room, which is where you are now. And then from there, then they'll tell you what they will deliver over the next 10 years for the next 100 years. When you look at that, you realize that there is absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be able to achieve and get from the right side to the left side of the room because of what they've already done. So I think your consistency and ability to deliver, and I think sets the path, right? Because it's a muscle that you learn in terms of, how quickly and closely can you align your vision to your execution.
What would something like what would be something new you learned out of working? Like, what would be the most interesting thing you've learned?
From work or outside?
Work.
What have I learned? A hard skill or a soft skill?
Hard skill.
Hard skill. Operations. I have learned the sort of proper, what it takes to really master and understand operations, complexities around operations, business transformation, building a business. I have learned that for sure.
And soft skills?
To have patience, to accommodate a lot, and be able to, again, it's they say that you're always promoted to your level of incompetency, right? And so understanding how you can push your own boundary and how you're able to learn and do it. And I think one of the areas, and we talked about it earlier, which is around, ability to work with people, ability to be a critical thinker. Those are all, I'd say, shaped around your soft skills, your ability to, tell a story, and your ability to work with people and through people. those are the soft skills that I think over the years that I would say I have mastered, but also just understanding my own limits, right? In terms of, how far do I go before I break, and what's my breaking point, and how do I get to that point and know that's, that's the last stretch before it all snaps. But it's also your ability to take on tasks, right? And be able to be adventurous. And I think this goes back, Claire, to what could people who are 13 today do? It's how do you give yourself the ability to take on challenges, right? So for a month, say yes to everything, right? Yes to experiences, yes to going somewhere. Your dad wants to take you somewhere, sit in a meeting and listen, say yes. So that ability to say yes, right? Or start before you say no, say yes, and then followed up with why not, right? You want to take on a new role and a new job and a new company? Yes, why not, right? And then allow yourself the freedom to be exposed, again, to as many things as possible, because that's the only way you can be sort of a better person, but also a better student, a better professional in how you're able to do it. I've landed in many places that I think generally, if I had thought a little bit stronger and longer, I probably would not have done. But, thank God for very quick decisions and you saying yes before you think through a lot of things.
You lived in how many countries now?
Quite a few.
Got a few. Which one taught you something that you think you would not have learned anywhere else?
That's a tough question. Something I would have learned
that you wouldn't have learned if you had not been in that country.
I'll tell you, I've learned two opposing ideas in different places. Again, because where you are is how you should adapt. So Switzerland was amazing. I loved my time in Switzerland. I lived there for 3 years. You understand how efficiency in its true form works, right? And so the bus is meant to be there or a train is meant to be there. It will be there on time, it will leave on time, right? So regardless of your situation, your circumstance, the way efficiency, government delivery is done, it's very structured. And so you learn to become very robotic in how you operate, right? So a store will open at a certain time, will close at a certain time. And that ability to sort of be very mechanical and almost live in a square, right? Where you know what the boundaries are, you know where you should do what you should do, but like limit yourself to that and work very efficiently within that. And it works fine because that's how it's designed and that's how everything functions well. You go from there, and I moved from Switzerland to Kenya. And I recall I went 2 months in, we traveled with some colleagues to Uganda, and we were meant to have a meeting at 2:00 in Kampala. At 1:55, we showed up for a 2:00 meeting. We waited. We told, the individual is out for a bit of time. 2:15, 2:30. You get to 2:45. At this point, I am pacing up and down because I'm like, what is the time? Like, you're not valuing time. It's like, you got to respect time. And I'm like, the person comes on, like, I had a long lunch and, the conversation went a little bit long. I know I'm a little bit late. We're starting our, 15 minutes late, but can we have the meeting? You have the meeting, etc. The meeting went well. It was a very good meeting. And in the evening, and true to African style, and, because we tell you things very poetically, right? And so sometimes you're blunt, but most times you'll be told the message in a different way. So we're sitting at dinner and they say, in Switzerland, Switzerland has a lot of watches. I said, yeah, they do, right? They're like, but in Africa, we have a lot of time. I said, So from there, I learned that you have to adapt to where you are. So abundance of time does not mean you don't have to respect time. That's not the message. But the point is, they're not as caught up in keeping time, at least in that particular individual and that particular meeting. Please, I don't want you to think away that, we Africans are late on things. That's not the message.
That's not the message.
That's not the message. The message is you have to adapt to localities in terms of who you were. Because had you had that same mentality and walked yourself into Geneva thinking, time is flexible, no, like you'll be left behind. No one will be there to help you, be it on the government side for services or anywhere. So it's you being able to adjust to where you are, localizing yourself and immersing yourself in the local culture becomes super good.
Thank you. I can relate. Do you have questions for us?
I do. Tell me more. How do you relate to that?
So I lived in Geneva. So, and that's where we met.
Yeah.
Those many years ago. So I can relate to that point. And then 3 years into living in Geneva, I moved to Kinshasa.
Mm.
And that year was probably my best professional experience. Because to your point, you come to the meeting with the expectations that it will work as you know it or you're used to it. But there's a complexity of living in certain cities. Not because the person doesn't want to, but things happen. It could be traffic.
Yeah.
Because the design has not necessarily caught up with expansion.
Yeah.
It could also be different things. One of the best lines that I got is when I was living in Ghana and I was waiting for someone, and then I called them and say, I am on my way coming. I stopped because it could mean that the person is still in bed, has not left. Yeah. But that expression translates the reality that the person is experiencing.
Yeah.
I will come to our meeting. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I will probably not be there when you expect me.
Yeah.
But I am on my way coming. It stayed with me. And that's sort of how I can relate to this. So you have to understand where the person is coming from.
Yeah.
And accept that context.
Yeah. Context, everything.
Is everything. Because you could have decided, what, it's 2:45, I'm walking away. Which the other person may have felt disrespected.
Yes, for sure.
And I love that analogy. The very poetic way of telling you, you live in a country where there are a lot of watches. I live in a place where we have a lot of time.
Yep.
But you read the time on the watch, which is static in a way. Yeah. It's a physical object. Yeah. But here I have a lot of time. So that I can relate to. And I think linked to that, what this has taught me in all the different countries where I lived is that you always have to think about what is the outcome you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And not the steps in between, the things that have happened, what can be seen as a delay or disrespectful. And if that meeting is 5 minutes, then use those 5 minutes to get what you need to be able to make to progress.
Agreed.
So yeah.
What do you think about it for your generation, Claire?
About like time?
Time or context. What does context mean?
For time, I feel like, this is in my opinion, I feel like time is going by so fast. Like people think, oh no, it's fine. I'll just, like for example, in like school, if you have like homework and you're like, no, I'll just do it like tomorrow, and before you know it, it's like, oh, it's due today. So yeah, and like even if you had the time before, you were like, I'll just do it later, and then like you end up not doing it. Yeah.
No, it's important because you are translating the time element in your reality.
Absolutely.
The deadline, the due date is your teacher expect to see your homework on that day.
Yeah.
No questions about, my daddy wasn't around, my mommy. So you're right. But you're good. Your homework is usually on time. More questions for us?
Oh, I think just maybe in terms of, where the next generation is going, what are your thoughts? Where do you think, what would be the skills that you would say Claire's generations need to have?
You touched on two. The creativity, the analytical piece, the storytelling. Because for you to tell a story, you need to have knowledge. And you need to have invested that time and effort to understand where the person is coming from. So whatever story you tell is based on lived experience.
Yeah.
You also touch on exposure. You have to be exposed to things. I tell the kids, the first time I left Abidjan, it was a trip to Bamako, the capital of Mali. My brother and I got on a bus and we're driven to Bamako. In Yamoussoukro, which is about 500 kilometers from Abidjan, the bus broke down. We slept outside, waiting for the other bus to come from Abidjan. Then we get to the border. We have to change buses. And the way they fit buses on the Malian side is very different. It's smaller, squashed, but that experience of being exposed to the reality of millions of Africans reminded me the first time I sat on a plane, which was 4 weeks later, because I told my parents, I'm not doing the journey back on bus. That was the first time I sat on the plane. That was in 96. And in 96, I was close to my 20. But that experience of understanding that it's a privilege, that somebody is willing to spend more money for your comfort, it's something that this generation needs to understand. That the access to technology that they have and all these different elements is somebody thought about it and really pushed for them to have that access. So if you have that access, question what do you build next for the generation that's come? And someone, which is our generation, we're doing all we can to give them the exposure, the storytelling, the ability to get into the best schools, which is again a luxury. So I remind them that I only primarily went to public schools, and the number of students in the class was not necessarily proportionate to the number of seats in the class. But those are experiences that made me who I am today.
Yeah.
And wanting to make sure that the next generation has more better, not at the cost of the generation that will follow them.
Yeah.
That's a tricky part.
I think the only other one, I absolutely agree with you, Carl. I think the one thing I would add maybe is just for the younger generation to be kind to themselves. You gotta give yourself more grace. And I'll tell you why. Because the pressure that you guys have now to compete and outcompete on all fronts, be it socially, be it academically, etc., is really high. In a way that, we probably don't experience it, right? And so, and rightly so. I mean, you're competing when you're going out of, high school. You're competing to get into limited, top universities, right? And then you're competing with everyone else. And so that edge that you're trying to creates so much pressure on you guys at your age, Claire, that you should succumb to it. So you have to remember to give yourself grace and space to be able to say, I will do my best, and my best is good enough to get me through. Because through it, what you will learn is that time, exposure, the skills that you have sort of, developed because you spent time on certain areas will help you get to where you need to. And that the path forward is not always straightforward.
Grace and space. I remember that. And the rhyme. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us. No, it was really, really rich. Thank you for coming, as Claire says. We really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think, what is one thing that you remember from this conversation? Okay.
Grace for all.
Grace and space.
And space.
I love that you need to give yourself that grace and space. I don't think I ever thought about it this way.
Yeah.
No, never. So maybe I should give myself grace in space.
I think we should all give. Yeah? There you go. Thank you very much. Officially. Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Well done.
Very well done.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Blueprint. We hope this conversation gave you something new to think about.
If you enjoyed these episodes, there's more where that came from. Tap on videos to catch other episodes. Each one explores a different part of a bigger picture.
A new episode drops next week, so hit that subscribe button and we'll see you soon.
And until then, keep building, learning, and asking better questions.
Bye.